John, just because it's summer doesn't mean you can sit around on your backside all day.
Skip.
You never take me anywhere.
Skip.
Man, I'm telling you, go paleo. It'll change your life.
Skip.
Don't get stuck with sounds you don't want to hear. Get Spotify Premium free with Vodafone X Music, plus 20 gigs of 4G data for just €20 top-up. Fuel your beats with free Spotify Premium. Search Vodafone X to find out more. For full terms, conditions and limitations, including our fair usage policy, see Vodafone.ie.
All right, beloved, welcome back to Global Spiritual Revolution Radio and Media Group here in New York City, New York, 929-477-3997. Again, beloved, that is 929-477-3997. Now, if you live outside of the continental United States of America, call us in right now at 1-929-477-3997. Again, beloved, that is 1-929-477-3997. Now, Global Spiritual Revolution Radio Media Group is nationally syndicated each and every week on the Talk America Radio Network out of Dallas, Texas. Now, beloved, the Talk America Radio Network is indeed the new dominant force in conservative talk radio, and we are also ever so blessed to be a part of the worldwide conglomerate of the iHeartRadio Network and the iHeart Media Group, also here in New York, 929-477-3997. We are so excited to have our very, very favorite guest, who is no longer a guest here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio, but this great man of God who is a spiritual mentor, a spiritual father of mine, a man of God who I believe is indeed the greatest teacher I have ever heard, including our staff and listeners here at Global Spiritual Revolution Radio, and that is the Honorable Dr. Stephen Pidgeon. He is America's #1 political scientist, and please go to his powerful website, which is www.cepher.net. Again, beloved, that is Cepher, capital CEPHER.net. And please order your F-Cepher right now. Now, the F-Cepher is indeed the most comprehensive restoration of secret scripture in the English language today. Please go to Cepher.net, Cepher.net. Get out your American Express, your Discover card. I'm telling you, MasterCard, your Visa, and I guarantee you, when you order the F-Cepher, and not just the F-Cepher, but all of the other materials that this powerful publishing group that we here at Global Spiritual Revolution Radio, we are just a small cell within this global body of the Cepher Publishing Group. Please go to Cepher.net, Cepher.net, and I guarantee you, especially you preachers, after reading the Cepher, your ministry would take off here in the 21st century. All right, Dr. Pidgeon, thank you so much, sir, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be back with us here tonight on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio.
Well, thank you for your kind words again tonight, Bishop. And again, it's my great pleasure and great honor to be with you on this program.
Oh, thank you so much, man of God. And again, that is Dr. Stephen Pidgeon. And to all of you university presidents, college presidents, you need to call this man of God right now. Just go to Sephir.net, contact his staff, and God willing, Global Spiritual Revolution Radio, we are preparing a National Conservative Summit at the Harvard School of Divinity sometime in the spring of 2019, and we want Dr. Pidgeon to be the keynote speaker for that endeavor. All right, we want to get into tonight a very unique and riveting subject entitled The History and Origins of Illegal Immigration. Again, the history and origins of illegal immigration. Our great President Donald J. Trump, signed an executive order thereby allowing children not to be separated from their parents, which law that President Barack Obama, actually going back 50 to 60 years to the Eisenhower administration, they were the ones that put in this law. And now the mainstream media is some way, somehow throwing stones at President Trump. But President Trump did the right thing. But at the same time, we must support our great president in these ICE agents who are doing a magnificent job. And we're going to take a history journey here tonight for the next week or two. And man of God, can you lead us into a word of prayer before we get into this very fascinating subject this evening?
Yes, I would love to. Let's begin tonight by joining together, Bishop, both you and I and those in the audience who are in agreement with us, that we have gathered in the name of the Messiah to lift up our voices and say, hear us, O Father, hear us now, as we lift our prayers to you coming into this discussion tonight, that your spirit would be with us, a spirit of truth, and one where your words would be poured forth from us in accordance with your divine will, and what it is you've had to say and what it is that you continue to say, because you are living among us even now. And we know that your hand is upon this creation and upon this nation. And may your hand be upon our words here tonight. Bless the things that we are going to say and discuss. We pray that we'd be a blessing to you in our words, and we would be honoring you, and that your name would be exalted above all in all of these things. We lift this to you now with great joy and anticipation of what you will do this evening. In the name of our glorious Messiah. Amen.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pidgeon. 929-477-3997. The history and the origins of illegal immigration. Man of God, and to our Global Spiritual Revolution partners, Dr. Pidgeon is not only the number one political scientist in this country, but one of the most powerful attorneys as well. Can you just give us a historical background of illegal immigration, a timeline? Here in the United States and abroad, going back however many years that the mind of Yah takes you back into this riveting history in the origins of illegal immigration. Provide the background for us, Dr. Pidgeon, so that we can understand the foreground of why it was so important for President Trump to crack down on illegal immigration.
Sure. I mean, this is such a great topic, Bishop. I'm glad you've raised this issue, and I can tell you this is going to be, shall we say, a real can opener. And so let's take a look. When we begin here in the Western world, we have a number of things. You know, a lot of when we talk about immigration, the first thing we have to discuss before you can talk about illegal immigration or any form of immigration is we first have to get a handle on and the knowledge of citizenship. And even this is a transient term. Okay, so, you know, throughout history, we have always pretty much been identified tribally by our tribal identity. And the tribal identities were very, very strong, and they were strong, you know, of course, across Europe. They were strong across Africa. They were strong even in the discoveries that were found in South America and in North America. It was tribal identity. So, for instance, the indigenous tribes in North America would include the Arapaho or the Iroquois, or some of the First Nations that you would see here to be identified by their tribal identity, not a nation state or an empire, but rather by tribe. You have this same discussion that goes on in Europe, so that you would have, for instance, the Celtic people, or you would be discussing the Saxons, or you would be discussing the Huns, who had come from the far reaches of the Khazarian Empire in the capital city of Atil, under the leadership of Attila the Hun, or the Hun from the capital of Atil, to migrate into Europe to create this nation of Hungary. And so you see that so many of the nation states were identified by their tribes. Now, this would change as we begin to emerge into feudalism. And as feudalism began to emerge, we saw, for instance, the Normans, which was a Gaelic tribe, cross the Straits of Dover and invade against the Saxons and the Anglos, who at that point had been infiltrated by the Danes as well, or the tribe of Dan. These tribes were going to be conquered by the Normans, and as the Normans began to establish feudalism, this is 1066, right, to establish feudalism in the British Empire, we begin to see for the first time, excluding the gigantic empires that ruled us before, we begin to see this rise of kingdoms, the idea of rising kingdoms. And the kingdoms now are going to begin to assert themselves outside of a tribal identity. Just to caution my remarks, I don't want to go back before that to discuss the rise of the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, although Byzantium was still in place during this time. Right? You still had this relic of Eastern Rome still existing until 1453. But with the rise of the European kingdoms, we begin to see a government now that's going to expand, that's going to include multiple tribes under its jurisdiction. Not just one tribe, but multiple tribes under its jurisdiction. And we begin to see the rule of law emerge. Now, let's discuss this rule of law as it emerged primarily in the United Kingdom, because, of course, during the 19th century, under the reign of Queen Victoria, the United Kingdom became this singular empire around the world the sun did not set on, and included all of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. It included South Africa, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and even arguably the United States, under this control of the British Commonwealth. And that Commonwealth imposed a series of laws, and those laws became dominant in the English-speaking world and continue to be the body of laws that govern trade throughout the world. So it's well accepted that English is the language of commerce around the world in every nation on earth. Air traffic controllers are required to speak English in every nation on earth. So we have this idea that the law that was going to take place now, the law that's going to rise, is going to be a law that is going to reach out to all of the citizens, but they weren't called citizens then. They were called subjects. And this is a very important distinction. The king or the queen owned the people of their jurisdiction. And so you had the subjects of the Tsar in Russia. You had, for instance, even look at Paul. Paul, when Paul was on trial, he was brought up before the council there in Jerusalem, and he said, after they had beaten him and so on, is it proper for you to beat a Roman citizen? And when he was on trial before Agrippa, he says, I appeal to Caesar. As a Roman citizen, I appealed to Caesar. Of course, it would have been a Roman subject. And he even talked to the centurion. He said, I was born a citizen of Rome. The centurion said, I had to pay for my citizenship. Paul says, I was born a citizen of Rome. Okay, these are big, big distinctions, because when we start talking about a citizen or a subject, you're talking about somebody who has specific rights and privileges under that citizenship and aligned with that particular jurisdiction. That is to say, the ability of the nation state to reach out and rendered decisions either for your benefit or to your destruction. And so this becomes critically important. So Paul says, look, I appeal now to Caesar. And so they said, well, look, I was actually going to believe you until you appealed to Caesar. Now we got to ship you to Rome. And so they did, in fact, ship him off to Rome to come under the jurisprudence Nero. Now, it's very interesting because Rome, at that time, expressed its jurisdiction by the guys who were capable of rendering a decision on behalf of Rome used to carry this bundle of sticks around with them that had axe heads at different points on each one of the sticks. And they would bundle that bundle of sticks, that bundle of axes, if you will, and they'd carry that with them to demonstrate their authority. So if the guy walked into the room and he says, okay, all rise, then the head honcho comes in and he's carrying this bundle of sticks with axe heads. Well, that bundle of sticks, that bundle of axes that was bound together was called the fasces. The fasces. And he would come in and he would place his fasces down there and say, as you can see, I have Roman authority to do what? I could pull out one of these axes and cut your head off if I decide that you're guilty of the crime. Or I can just have you tied to the whipping post here, and we can take care of it that way. But you had this kind of reach of the jurisdiction of Rome as to its citizens. Now, non-citizens, you see Pilate wrestling with this issue of non-citizenship in Judea, because when Mashiach is presented to him, he says, look, what am I supposed to do here? And his wife comes to him and she says, don't have anything to do with that guy. I had a bad dream about him. Get him out of here. Don't touch him. And so Pilate says, look, I don't find he's committed no wrong under Roman law.
Right.
But the Sadducees and the Pharisees said, we have a law here. He blasphemed. How did he blaspheme? He said, I tell you the truth, before Abraham, I am. Right? Before Abraham was, I am. And, of course, they had a little bit of a problem with that. But anyway.
Yes, sir.
So they decide, under our law, he is to be put to death. But again, during that period of time, because there was no jurisdiction in Judea for the Sadducees and the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin to put someone to death, they had to make sure that it was the Romans who did it. And Pilate's wrestling with this whole issue. Well, under Roman law, we have no reason to put him to death. Under your law, you have a reason to put him to death, but we don't. And so he's asking himself, what can I do to this person who is not a citizen of Rome in a place where we have jurisdiction? Look, this question is still in front of us today, Bishop. You have,
yes, sir.
I don't know if there's still people in Guantanamo Bay or not, but when you have somebody that you've captured in a field of battle and you're saying, okay, this person wasn't in uniform, so they're not an enemy combatant that can be governed by the Geneva Convention or the Hague Convention. You weren't in uniform. You're out here out of uniform, so technically you're to a nation state because of your failure to identify an affiliation. So what do we do with this non-citizen? Does he rise to a point of having citizenship rights that the law of Rome, for the purposes of this discussion, should apply? Or should we apply the law that he is currently under? That is to say, the law of terrorists or the law of the Taliban or Sharia law or whatever. I mean, you have a question there. And this question has remained unanswered in this country right now, dealing with enemy combatants who are non-affiliated. This is going to reach even bigger status because there are people in the world right now that have no citizenship. Their citizenship has been stripped. They're called stateless people. They have no citizenship at all. And when they have no citizenship, they have no right to demand rights under any constitution because there's no constitution that governs them. So when we look at this rise of citizenship versus subject, the Queen or the King of England declared anyone who falls under his jurisdiction to be subjects. And the king didn't want to lose subjects. He wanted to continue to obtain more and more subjects. So you had questions. Well, what if I send a set of, ships out that are all full of the subjects of the crown, and I send them over to India or someplace like this to go and do battle or set up a colony. And the people are there, and then they marry women that are in India, and they have children in India. Are those children subjects of the crown? That was always a question. And so you rise up to this. This question began to be answered by the French, i.e. Louis Vattel, who wrote in the Law of Nations. The Law of Nations talking about citizenship, and in particular, he talks about how citizenship is passed down from parent to child through the father. Okay, so traditional citizenship around the world, and this is the case in most nations on earth today, citizenship or coming under the jurisdiction of a particular sovereign to do with the father's nationality. So if you have a father who is British and you have a mother who is of India, the child would have the citizenship of Britain because the father was British, and so the nationality passed to the father. Sorry about the siren here. They must have found out that I'm talking on the phone.
Yes.
Talking with you. So
yes, sir.
So anyway,
That's
so
good.
So what you see is that you see this kind of citizenship now becomes very pointed in Europe in particular. And so people begin to identify in their allegiance to the particular sovereign. So Germans were allied to the Kaiser, and the Kaiser, of course, is the German word for Caesar. Russians were aligned to the Tsar, and of course the Russian word Tsar, it also comes from the word Caesar. And you have, and then people would call the king sire, which is another form of saying Tsar, because in Russia it's actually pronounced sire, which is another name for Caesar. And people would be aligned to the king of France. They would be aligned to the Kaiser of Germany. They would be aligned to the Tsar of Russia. They would be aligned to the king of Spain. But all of this had to do with these nation states declaring their subjects, who were subject to their jurisdiction, the ability to say, I'm going to adjudicate you in a court of right or wrong, and in addition to that, you may have rights. You may have rights that arise under our Constitution or under a form of government. Now, so it became a critical point. In fact, we fought a war over it in this country when the United States was formed. Because the United States was formed, and the United States, when it was formed, was really quite reactionary. You know, you had the colonies that were brought here by the Crown, and these colonies were formed under British corporations that were owned wholly by the King of England. And these corporations in Massachusetts Bay Colony and Pennsylvania and Virginia, you know, all of these were corporations owned by the Crown. And from 1620 until 1776, the Crown enjoyed this, but the Crown executed against the colonies with impunity. And the Crown did not play it very smart. They just essentially exploited the colonies for everything they could get. And when that barrel was running dry, they upped the ante. And the colonists said, that's enough. We're not going to put up with it anymore. And so you had this Declaration of Independence. Well, the Declaration of Independence now asserts something quite new, because in Europe at that time, you have this concept of the law of nations. Now, the law of nations essentially is this. There is this concept of sovereignty, okay, the sovereign nation state. And the sovereign nation state says there is no law superior to our law within our nation. This is the full exercise of sovereignty. And so it doesn't make any difference what Russia thinks the United States should do. Doesn't make any difference what Egypt thinks Greece should do or what Turkey thinks Israel should do. It's irrelevant. They can have their own opinions about their own nation, but inside the nation state, sovereignty is the ability to say, exactly what the law is and exactly what the law isn't. When you lose sovereignty, like if you become a conquered nation, you have another nation state imposing upon you laws that belong to the other nation state, not to you. So, for instance, when we conquered Japan after World War II, or when we accepted the surrender of Japan after World War II, we imposed a constitution on Japan. You know, Douglas MacArthur imposed a constitution on Japan that included many of our laws, that we asserted our sovereignty over the nation state of Japan, which had lost its sovereignty as a result of the surrender in the war. We did the same thing in Germany. Actually, we did the same thing throughout most of Europe. So you see that you have this idea of the law of nations and the nation state and this issue of sovereignty. So under the issue of sovereignty, we were bound under lawful contracts to the King of England in respect of the colonies. And yet we put something out in the Declaration of Independence, in the very first paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, that says there comes a time when we get to divide it up. Why? Because there is a law that is superior to the law of the nation, of the law of nations. There is a law that is superior to the sovereign state. This was quite an interesting, revolutionary idea. What law was it? We said it is in accord with the laws of nature and of nature's God, that we asserted as being superior to the law of nations, the law of sovereignty. Now, this was the first time we asserted it, but we would assert it again at Nuremberg. Because at Nuremberg, we came to the Germans, and the Germans said, look, we were just following orders. You can't put us to death. If you want to put somebody to death, put Adolf Hitler to death. He was the one telling us what to do. And we said to them, no, we can find you guilty because you violated the law which is superior to the law of nations, which is the laws of nature and of nature's God. We can use that term. It's a term of art. That term of art was initially coined by a French writer named Jean Baudin. And Jean Baudin was a young man who'd gone to seminary to become a Catholic monk. And after he graduated seminary in Paris, he went to Geneva to study under John Calvin. And he studied under John Calvin for 12 years, and he returned to Paris and became a lawyer. And when he became a lawyer, he embarked on this quest to determine what is the nature of law in Western Europe. And the question was, is it Roman, i.e. the Corpus Juris Civilis that bloomed from the Justinian Code, or is it Greek, blooming from Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, and that whole line of thought that came out of the Greek world? And so he wrestled Greek, Roman, Roman, Greek, and ultimately he came to conclude that the source of the law, of course, was Hebrew, that it came from the doctrines of Moshe. That is to say, these statutes that were written out in what we call the Pentateuch, or is also known as the Torah. And when you look at that, we see in the modern world that the law of torts all arises out of Moshe's Torah. The idea that, you know, if you kill a man's ox, you have to pay him this particular amount of money. If you damage a man's stuff, you have to do this. You know, there is this idea of compensation and remuneration for the damages that you have done. And all of the tort law springs out of that. There's also the idea of the criminal law that also springs out of that. There were things that were defined as being criminal behavior. You also had the restrictions on, for instance, what would become the laws of incest. No marrying your mother-in-law, no marrying your first cousin, you know, these kinds of things. All of these things came out of the Torah, and so even the Roman law was predicated upon that, and eventually all European law would be based upon the behavioral norms structured inside the Torah, or inside this teaching of Moshe. However, all of that is also mitigated by the teaching of the Messiah, okay? He also gives us constructs conform the teaching of Moshe to a refined position, or what I call the completed Torah, which there is no complete Torah without the teachings of the Messiah in the gospel, okay? Just leave it at that. So Jean Baudin, he, in this 6 books of the Commonwealth, or 6 essays on the Commonwealth that he writes, he lays out for the first time this idea of the laws of nature and of nature's God. Now, the laws of nature are pretty clear. We can see these laws of nature. Sometimes you get them in a physics class or in a science class, that you'll see the so-called laws of nature, like entropy, for instance, that are given to us, and we understand these laws of nature. But the laws of nature's God are a little bit different issue. So when the judge walked in and confronted the Nazi judge at Nuremberg, and that judge said, he looked at the American judge and he said, "How can you possibly expose me to the potential of dying? I'm a judge just like you." And the American judge looked at him and said, "The first time you sentenced an innocent man to death, you knew this day was coming."
Yes.
Right? And it has to do with, there is a law that is superior to the law of nations, which is the laws of nature and of nature's God. Okay. But nonetheless, you see that with sovereignty now, you have these kings and queens identifying their subjects. Well, in the United States, we said, well, wait a minute. We want to develop American citizenship. We had this Revolutionary War. We arrived at a truce that established the United States. There's some things about that truce that would, it would do well for the scholar to study the full nature of what happened there. But nonetheless, we were able to create an independent government, and for purposes of autonomous ruling, we began with the United States of America, which were the 13 colonies. And when these United States began to be formed, the first thing on the table was citizenship. Now, this idea of citizenship, which is I claim the singular jurisdiction of the United States as my citizenship. Well, the Crown continued to say, well, look, you guys can say that all you want, but you were British subjects before we granted you America, and you're still British subjects now. So when we bring a man of war down there and we catch some of your fishermen out there fishing, we're throwing them on board and drafting them, and they're going to be sailors for the Crown. And so the British continued to do this even after 1776, even after 1789 with the adopting of the Constitution. The British were continuing to take American sailors and putting them into service for the Crown on British men of war. And it was John Jay, who was the first Supreme Court justice in this country, who began trying to negotiate a treaty. And John Jay is the one who said, well, now just wait a minute. He is the one that was singularly responsible for, Article 2, Section 1, Paragraph 5 of the United States Constitution, which says that no person can be a president of the United States unless he is a natural-born citizen of the United States.
Yes.
Okay? Now, people in this country, they have no idea that, well, natural-born citizen, that clause is so archaic and so meaningless. Who cares what an NBC is, a natural-born citizen? Nobody cares about that. Well, you should care about it, because here we are. Okay? Here we are, Bishop. We're at a point now where we've got the sandpaper against the metal, and we've got the rub, okay? Here's the rub, and stuff is getting scraped.
Yes.
And so when you look at this, you say, okay, now we're at an issue where we need to know, what is a natural-born citizen? Does that differ from being a subject? Does that differ from being a naturalized citizen? And the answer is yes, it does. And John Jay was very specific about this, because he was going to negotiate the Jay Treaty with Britain, because we would ultimately fight the War of 1812 over the issue of whether or not the British could press American citizens into service of the Crown as subjects of the Crown, notwithstanding their American citizenship. Which became a very big deal. I mean, if you had been alive then, you know, there'd have been factions protesting the war, there'd have been people in support of the war, but you can rest assured that the average American understood how critically important it was not to have a British agent taking the office of the presidency.
Wow.
And so John Jay said, what we need here is we need a clause that says you must be a natural-born citizen to hold the office of the presidency. What does that mean? That means your dad was a citizen of this country when you were born. And, I mean, basically that's the simplest way to understand it. Your dad was a citizen of this country. When you were born a citizen of this country. Okay. Now, we've had some exceptions to that rule.
Yes.
The first exception, of course, was Chester A. Arthur, who was actually a Canadian citizen, except that Canada had not achieved sovereignty at the time, so he was actually what? A British citizen. He was a British subject masquerading as an American citizen, and he got away with it. Now,
wow.
We had another British agent sitting in the office of the presidency for 8 years in our lifetime.
Yes.
One Barack Hussein Obama.
That's right.
Okay, so I mean, let's just take a moment. I know this is kind of a rabbit trail, but it's important when we talk about this from an immigration point of view. Now, let's say, Bishop, you're driving down the road, okay? Unfortunately for you, you're going through the Hudson Tunnel and you're headed for the New Jersey Turnpike, right?
Yes. Yes, that's it.
Okay, there you go. All right, now, you get pulled over.
Yes.
And the guy pulls you over and he says, okay, look, are you an American citizen? Now, most people in New York have never had that question asked to them. But in New Mexico, they get that question all the time. And yes, New Mexico was one of the 50 states. Okay, so you're down there around Albuquerque. You're driving down. Maybe you're going down to Roswell to check out some alien rumors, you know.
Yes.
And as you're driving, you get pulled over. And the guy says, are you an American citizen? And you say, yeah, I'm an American citizen. Prove it. Now, given the fact that California and Oregon and Washington issue driver's licenses to people who cannot establish their citizenship, and they know full well they can't establish their citizenship, they just allow them to use a Social Security number to get their driver's license and, you know, any proof that you happen to live in the state, like maybe you have an electric bill or maybe you have a sewer bill or something like this, boom, if you can prove that your name's on a bill and you can proffer any Social Security number, boom, you get a driver's license. Okay. So now, if driver's licenses aren't going to work, okay, so how many Americans carry a passport with them when they're driving? Very few. So you say to yourself, well, how do I prove that I'm an American citizen? Well, there is one document, and one document alone, that proves you're an American citizen. It's called a birth certificate. That is the singular document that proves your citizenship. Everything else is what we call circumstantial evidence that you're a citizen, but the document that proves your citizenship is your birth certificate. Now, there's two forms, right? You have your original birth certificate. That's the one that was filled out when you were at the hospital being born or wherever you were born. It's got the state seal on it. It's got the two witnesses on it. It's got the state stamp on it. Boom, that's your original birth certificate. And then when you call up the public records and you say, look, give me a copy of my birth certificate, they send you a certified record of live birth, or what's called a COUP. Okay, they send you this certificate of live birth, and it's not your birth certificate, but it's a certificate of live birth that you can use as proof that yeah, I've got a birth certificate. I was born here. And it's got the state seal. It's got a stamp. It's got all the information on it. Boom, there you go. Cold. Okay, great. So now what's that birth certificate say? It says United States of America, right? State of California, state of New York, state of Illinois, right? You have this state seal on there telling you that you were born in this country. And then it gives the citizenship of your parents right there on that birth certificate. And so now you know, am I an American citizen or not? Well, your birth certificate tells you that. That's the only document there is that proves your citizenship. Our friend Mr. Obama has never produced a bona fide birth certificate.
That's right.
So as a consequence, we don't know if he's a citizen or not. He's never given us the foundational document that proves his birth. Now, some people say, oh, yeah, I did. He published it on the White House website. No, what he published was a fraudulent, forged document. This has been proved outright. It's been proved. And he produced 2 previous faked and forged Kolb's certificates of live birth. One was a Kolb that was put up as an internet image that had the certificate blacked out, totally invalid on its face. Yet Bill O'Reilly held it up and said, I have his birth certificate right here. Chris Matthews did the same thing. And they didn't. They had this invalid, on its face, internet image. It wasn't a Kolb. It was just an internet image. Then the next one was factcheck.org, which produced a forged Kolb that had supposedly a stamped state seal on it. The only problem was the state seal was just a generic seal, and the bumps are supposed to come up on the top of the page. These bumps went down, and it had different information on it than the first Kolb. So I mean, it was so badly done, right? And then finally, you had the long-form birth certificate that was supposedly released from Hawaii. That, of course, my friend Doug Vogt went and filed an affidavit that went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. It's available online right now. That detailed and indicated 26 points of forgery. I mean, it was absurd. The thing was so badly forged. I don't want to go into it now, but it was now. So we don't have a birth certificate from Barack Hussein Obama. Never got one. But what we do have is we have the conclusion of the Russians that when Barack Obama, before he was president in 2006, made a state visit to Russia with Senator Richard Lugar. When they were leaving Russia, Barack Obama was detained on suspicion of being a British agent. That's possible to look this up online right now.
Wow.
And they believed he was a British agent because he had claimed for 17 years before he became the president. He claimed for 17 years that he was the son of Barack Obama from Kenya and that he was born in Kenya. Now, Barack Obama Sr. never, ever claimed American citizenship. Never. He never even had a green card. He was here on a student visa, never claimed American citizenship. And so if Barack Hussein Obama was serious, my father's Barack Obama, well, if that's the case, then you're a Kenyan national and you're not an American citizen, period. You can't be. You cannot be a natural-born citizen if your father is from Kenya. Impossible. Under the law of nations. Impossible. Now, equally important, Barack Obama Sr., was actually a citizen of British East Africa because Kenya didn't become Kenya until 1964. And Barack Hussein Obama was born supposedly in 1961. Therefore, his citizenship would have been British East Africa. And when the British Nationality Act occurred in 1981, he had automatic British citizenship by virtue of his Kenyan birth.
Wow. Man, that's powerful.
Okay, so now we're starting to see here that this citizenship and the being subject to a particular sovereign, it becomes very, very critically important. Okay.
Yes.
So when we begin to talk about immigration now, let's take a look at what the format was here in the United States. In the United States, we had, again, the citizenship was very tentative. We had to fight for American citizenship in the War of 1812. And after that, you get this very interesting discussion of the history of citizenship in this, in this dirty rag we call the Dred Scott decision.
Yes.
You have the first part of that decision, of course, which reiterated the position that somehow the African American people in this country were something less than human beings and subject to a chattel property arrangement. Now, by the way, I just want to say this. That totally violates all tenets of Scripture. Okay?
Yes.
Completely violative of the tenets of Scripture. And furthermore, Scripture is very clear that even a bondservant who can only be held for 7 years, even a bondservant who escapes, as was the case with Dred Scott, he had escaped into Missouri, that he was a free citizen. Once he escaped, that's it. But not Justice Taney in the Dred Scott decision. Oh, no.
Yes.
He's chattel property. He's not a human being. He's chattel property, and therefore he has to be returned. And, of course, that would set the fire to the Civil War. But nonetheless, you had the rest of his decision talking about the history of citizenship. Now, prior to the Civil War, we had these concepts of federalism, where you had each of the states was basically sovereign. And so your citizenship first was either in New York or in Pennsylvania or Virginia. So, Robert E. Lee was a Virginian, right? And so you had this idea that your citizenship was of the state in which you were born, not necessarily the United States. That was a secondary citizenship. Your primary citizenship was in the state where you were born. This concept, of course, would be overruled after the Civil War because of the 14th Amendment, when the idea of federalism really suffered egregiously with the 14th Amendment imposing the will of the federal government over the tops of the states, and the sovereignty of the states has really become a de minimis now. There's still some, but it's residual. So that was the concept of citizenship then. Now, as we move into a latter period, now we're going to become more American citizens. And this idea of American citizenship being expressed by an American birth certificate. All right.
Yeah.
The Constitution does not allow for the United States Congress to determine what is a natural-born citizen. Okay? The United States Congress can't pass a bill saying, we're now saying the natural-born citizen is anybody who happens to be born in the United States. Okay? And by the way, that idea of having citizenship by being born there that law is only in effect, I think, in 5 nations on earth. All of the countries, with few exceptions, that have tried doing that, granting citizenship to people who were born here just because they were born here or born within the jurisdiction, they have reversed that policy and said, we're not going to do that anymore. They don't do that. The generally accepted rule is that citizenship is bestowed on the child from the citizenship of the father. Now, in the 20th century, naturalization laws, Congress was given the rights to make laws concerning naturalization and immigration, not what is a natural-born citizen. And so you had this initial, what was it called? A Naturalization Act of 1790 that was initially drafted, and it tried to grant natural-born citizenship status to somebody who was born at sea. Well, that act was overruled, and they tried it, and then they got rid of it. And we had a new act come out, I think it was 1799, that changed that act. But from there, we get these ideas of rules of naturalization. Now, the naturalization process is the first thing that happened was, okay, can citizenship pass to the child from the mother? I mean, that's the very second question, right? Can citizenship pass to the child from the mother? And the answer is yes, it can. But that's done so through a naturalization act. Okay, there is a federal law that says Congress has the authority to determine what is naturalization and what is immigration, and we're saying that a child who is born who wants his American citizenship through his mother or her mother can do so, and that child has American citizenship. But it is a naturalization process that makes that child an American citizen, even though there may be no forms to fill out.
Yes.
Nonetheless, it's the only reason that child has citizenship through the mother is by virtue of naturalization. All right. Now, there were some very interesting particulars about those naturalization laws, which is to say that the American mother had to be in the country for the last 5 years before the child was born, that she had to be over the age of 21. I mean, there were a number of factors that were imposed on that naturalization regimen, which gives you an idea that it wasn't just automatic. So, for instance, we have the curious condition, the curious citizenship of Senator Ted Cruz. And this is a very curious citizenship because his birth certificate is, of course, a Canadian birth certificate, right?
Right. Yes, sir.
He's got this Canadian birth certificate from Calgary, great city, but this is where he was born. And both his mother and father were living there. And his mother had been out of the country for better than 6 years when he was born. And furthermore, there's rumor that she may have naturalized to Canada as a Canadian citizen. Okay. Actually, there's more rumor. But what you see there is the oath to naturalize to Canada is an oath of total sovereign expression. That is to say, if you're going to naturalize into Canada, you had to give an oath to the Queen, and you had to forego all other citizenship. It's an exclusive oath. So by doing so, the naturalization laws state that if you give that oath, even if you were a natural-born American citizen, your citizenship is automatically revoked. That law is still in effect today. So then Senator Cruz, of course, was born in Canada, may have had both parents naturalized in Canada, and then he returns to Texas. And he returns to Texas and runs for senator. But we don't have any naturalization process from Senator Cruz. Now, it's possible to be a senator even if you're a naturalized citizen. But it's really not possible to be a senator if you're not a citizen at all. And so anyway, Ted Cruz's citizenship is an interesting study. It's a very interesting case.
Yes.
And so now we have to go in and we have to look at the situation when we're talking about immigration into the nation, okay, general immigration. This country at one point had its doors very wide open. But you have to remember, when this country had its doors wide open, this was a different world. You know, when I was a kid, my parents were living in California. You know, I was born in California. And my parents said, hey, we're packing it up and heading for Alaska. And Alaska was advertised at that time as the last frontier. And trust me, it was the last frontier. It was, you know, I mean, it was no man's land, right?
Yes, sir.
I mean, yeah. You know, I mean, you know, we drove 1,200 miles over the Alcan, you know, and that which was a lane and a half wide dirt road, and we got into Alaska, and I mean, there was no road, no direct road connecting Anchorage to Fairbanks. You know, it was very, very isolated. and very frontiersy. And this was before oil was discovered. So basically, you had a lot of gold miners and you had a lot of fishermen living there, along with the First Nations who were living there. But that was basically it. And then, of course, some military bases. And so it was very primitive. I mean, I can remember, eggs were like $1 each. And, then in the winter, you go down to the store, right, for produce. And they'd have this yellow, orangish looking thing that they were trying to call a tomato, and you'd never see a banana. I mean, it was just ridiculous, right?
Right. Yes, sir.
But it was the last frontier. Now, the frontier now is gone, right? Because now everywhere on Earth is accessible. There is no frontier. There's no place to go. There's no go west, young man, as Horace Greeley said. That stuff doesn't exist anymore. Every jurisdiction is tightened down. There's systems in place. Everything is right. There is no frontier. There's no frontier anywhere on Earth now. Now, because there's no frontier, the immigration policy in the United States began to change. So, we had a wide open door at Ellis Island, bring us your poor and your huddled masses, right? Come on in, right? And a lot of that, we saw waves of immigration come in. We saw, for instance, even though it was primarily a British set of colonies, of course, you had this massive immigration that came in, which was what? Slave traders. Yes. Slave traders. Yes. And they brought in a massive class. Now, some of those people, and of course, this isn't well known, but a lot of those people were indigenous people in the Caribbean, right? There were slavers who picked up guys off the Caribbean islands and brought them up. And you had slavers coming, but the slavers were bringing not only Africans and Caribbeans into the country, into the southern part of the country, but the British under Oliver Cromwell was the one who first developed the idea of selling the Irish into slavery. The Irish were continued to be sold into slavery into this country. But the problem with the Irish is that you bring the Irish to America, where nobody really had a good, British accent anymore, and you'd bring the Irish in, and they would integrate, and they'd pick up the accent, and then they'd slip away, and you couldn't tell who was a former slave or not. But you could with the African.
Yes.
And so this is why they began to concentrate and said these are the slavers. Now we know that there were many, many successful African Americans living up in Maryland, living in New York, living in Washington, D.C., who still had to fight the blight of being called a slave, and the Lord help them if they ever went south of the Mason-Dixon. But nonetheless, you see what happened here, that we had this tide of immigration. Now, following that, in comes this influx of Germans. And the Germans said, well, this is great, and we had an influx of Dutch. And then, of course, you had this wave of immigration from Italy. Well, why were these Germans and the Dutch and the Italians coming here? Because the conditions in Europe were a lot worse than they were here.
Yes. That's right.
And again, the influx of the Irish. And so people would come into Ellis Island, and the only people that were being excluded, people that had tuberculosis or people that, couldn't pass the stress test of walking up the flight of stairs, and they would be excluded. Otherwise, the door was pretty much wide open. And I know when my great-grandfather on my mother's side came through Ellis Island, his Italian name was Iadarosa. And so he gets up to the line. What's your name? My name is Iadarosa. And the guy says, well, from here on out, your name is Ross, right? R-O-S-S, hit the road, right? And so that family picked up the name Ross thereafter, right? But there was a lot of immigration that was taking place in other places in the country. I mean, people were coming over the Rio Grande. People were coming into San Francisco. People were coming into the West Coast. There was a lot of Chinese immigration that was being brought in because the railroad needed workers. They brought in a lot of Chinese workers, and the Chinese workers didn't pass through any immigration. We need the workers. They brought them in. Nobody said a thing, right? And so there's still a question. Okay, are these people citizens? Well, that there was a real question of that. And when did we start solidifying what is citizenship? All right, now enter the 14th Amendment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the 14th Amendment, right, declares as citizens those people who were born in the United States, born or naturalized in the United States, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof.
Yes.
And again, we come back to this concept of so critically important, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. You remember we talked about Pilate and the Messiah. And Pilate's going, how do I get a jurisdictional reach over this man to crucify him when he hasn't committed any offense under Roman law? Right? And when we talk about subject to the jurisdiction, now let me give you an example when you're not subject to the jurisdiction. Let's say we have a guy, look, just for hypothetical purposes, we have a guy come in from Russia. And the guy's living in the States, and he gives birth to a child. He doesn't, but his wife does.
Mm-hmm.
And the child naturally ascribes to the citizenship of the father under the law of nations. The child's running around. He's 5, he's 10, he's 15, he's 18 years old. Nobody said anything about them being here. Then one day he commits a crime, and it's a serious crime. Is he subject to the jurisdiction of the United States? Well, here's a question. Can he run in the doors of the Russian embassy and say, you can't touch me. I'm a Russian citizen, and I'm in the Russian embassy. Can he do that? If he can, then arguably he's not subject to the jurisdiction of this country, even though he's here. Now, don't tell this to a judge, because a judge says, look, if I can haul you into my courtroom, I've got jurisdiction over you, right?
Right. That's right.
Yeah. I mean, a judge has never seen the day when they don't have jurisdiction, right?
You see, that's it.
So when you're talking about jurisdiction, though, this becomes a big deal. Okay, so when we talk about immigrants coming in, if you have a body of immigrants that are coming in from Mexico, and they say, well, look, I'm a Mexican citizen, which is a given. They don't have American citizenship. So you say, then they give birth to a child. Now the question is with that child, you say, well, that child is, the dreamers, right? The DACA children. Are these children, because they were born here under the 14th Amendment, do they have automatic American citizenship? And the answer is, it depends on whether or not they can run into a Mexican embassy and say, you can't touch me here. Because if they can do that, then arguably they're not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States.
Right.
Okay? All right. It's an argument. Now, when we talk about what's going on, now, when you go down to Mexico, or you go to Guatemala or El Salvador, Colombia, or Peru, right? And I'll give you an example. I had some friends, musicians, and they were going to do a mission trip. They were going down to Bolivia, and they were going to play for a crusade in Bolivia. Okay, all that's fine. They get down to Bolivia, everything's going great. They're going to play the crusade. They play the crusade. When they're done playing the crusade, this massive hurricane breaks out in the Caribbean. And I don't know if you remember this. I don't remember the name of the hurricane, but it came up right up to the Yucatan, and then it just sat there. And it sat there for like a week or 10 days. And so here they are. They're in Bolivia, and they're going, well, we want to go home. Well, I'm sorry, but there's no flights leaving from Bolivia to L.A. because they're not going to fly through the hurricane. So you have to wait for the hurricane to go away. So they waited, and the hurricane wouldn't go away. In the meantime, the leadership, they'd all flown to Rio and went back to New York, right? They left the musicians sitting there in Bolivia.
Right.
And so here they are. So finally they come to them and say, well, here's the situation. If you don't get on the plane today, then you guys are going to be spending the winter down here in Bolivia because there won't be any more flights at all. Okay, well, then we better go. So they leave, and they leave the little town. They fly up to the capital city there, and no flights. So this woman shows up, and she says, well, look, let's fly into Peru, and then we can get a flight from there. Oh,
Right.
okay. All right. I guess that's what we have to do. So they load up all their gear. They get on this plane. The plane takes off. And as the plane takes off in their head, quick, this thing is making all kinds of wacky noises. Pretty soon the pilot comes on. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this plane is not going to get over the Andes. We're going back. So he flies back. And so they finally get another flight. They fly into Peru. They get off the plane in Peru. They're met by immigration. You don't have a visa to be in this country.
Right.
They locked them all up in a concrete room until their flight was ready. No visa. You go into other countries, you're in that other country illegally, they'll put you in prison for that.
Yes.
They were kind enough in Peru not to put them in prison, but they locked them up in a room for 11 hours until their flight was ready to go. Then put them on the plane and send them back to America. And this is the kind of treatment you see at the southern Mexican border. Very harsh enforcement of anybody who comes over that border fence that they have up down there. And this is what you see in almost every other country. We don't see it as Americans, but you try flying into Malaysia with no visa. You know, you try flying into fly into Russia with no visa. See what happens to you.
Right.
Okay, but people have an expectation that, well, you know, we travel down to Mexico all the time. Therefore, the border should be porous and everybody should be coming over. And the truth is that by that border being porous, we've had a lot of people come over that border that were reading the Quran, for instance. They found multiple copies of the Quran on some of these trails in southern Arizona. Multiple copies. There was an interesting book that was published back in, I think, the late 90s, talking about Al-Qaeda being able to work its way over the border with no difficulty, over the southern border with no difficulty, and that they may have snuggled in suitcase nukes over that same border. And so you see, you have a very serious security situation on that border. Now, since then, that security situation has gotten much more difficult. So let's talk about some of the harsh realities. And this is not to condemn any of the Mexican people whom, you know, I love the Hispanic community as much as I love anybody else. I mean, it's a great community of people.
Yes.
But you have to remember, the culture that is dominant in Mexico today is dominated by drug cartels. Now, you can try to avoid that reality, but anybody who lives in Mexico knows that is the situation, that the drug cartels dominate the entire social paradigm, particularly along the American border. And so some of these cities, like Juarez, for instance, I mean, it's just a murder capital. You don't go down there. If you don't know somebody, you're going to end up dead. And during the regime of Barack Obama, we had a certain attorney general named Eric Holder who began the distribution of firearms, I mean, massive amounts of firearms to the drug cartels that included 50 caliber sniper rifles. Now, this was the Fast and Furious scandal. There were ATF agents that came forward, whistleblowers came forward and said, look, this isn't a sting operation. We're making sure that hundreds of these weapons get in the hands of the drug cartels to make sure that these cartels are armed and they're killing U.S. citizens with these weapons. Nobody did a thing. Nobody's gone to jail over that. The whistleblower got in trouble, of course. There were major firearms that were smuggled into these cartels. Now, there's been some events since then where you have these, there's a very violent gang out of El Salvador. It's called MS-13. And, you know, there's some violent gangs in the world, right? Like, for instance, some of the top traffickers in the world are the Albanian mafia, right? And the Albanian mafia operates primarily out of Greece, but they engage in massive human trafficking. And I mean, I can tell you, to give you an idea how big this is, Bishop. I was in Athens back in 2010, and one night, a Greek friend of mine who used to work, he used to go to the brothels at midnight, and he'd bring tea and muffins, and he'd say, "Okay, girls, get down here. It's time to get down here for tea, muffins, and some prayer." And he'd bring them down, and they pray. And I'd say, I said, "Don't you worry about somebody going to kill you for doing that?" He said, "Let me tell you, Stephen," he says, "when you're in the will of God, you're in the safest place on earth. When you're outside the will of God, you're always in danger." And I thought to myself, that's a good word. But one of the guys who was at the Athens Refugee Center where we were was a former Albanian mobster. And he was telling me about the trafficking. And one day it came up that, I think it was on a Thursday, he said, last night, 1,500 Nigerian women disappeared just like that, gone, on some ship out of here. And so you see, when you start talking about human trafficking, I mean, this stuff is going on in the Albanian mob, totally ruthless, much more ruthless. Even the Sicilians in Italy were afraid of these Albanians. But the Albanians don't hold a candle to MS-13.
Right.
And so here's MS-13, and they're amassing and they're training in El Salvador. They're also amassing and training and working for the mob. When you talk about the drug cartels along the border, the Mexican-American border, you have this worship. Now, I don't remember the names of all these gods that they worship, all right? But, you have this idea of the Dia de Muerte, the Day of the Dead. Okay, and this Day of the Dead is a form of necromancy, in my opinion. It should never be practiced, but yet it is a big celebration in Mexico now, and it creates a superstition inside the faith, is kind of like the same superstition you see in voodoo, right? Remember that Haiti was primarily a Catholic jurisdiction, and they consider voodoo a form of Catholicism. Yeah, and of course, Haiti has its own problems, right? Because they said, if you break us free of the yoke of French slavery, we will serve you Lucifer. And so from the time they made that commitment, they, in fact, were broken free from the yoke of slavery, but they are the poorest nation in the Americas because of that pledging of the soul of the nation to Satan. And they know it. They know it.
Yes.
And look at how bad it is. Look at how bad it's been for them. I mean, when you talk about trafficking, there are children that were trafficked out of that country into this country, while the money for the earthquake relief is going into the hands of the Clinton Foundation. These children were being trafficked out of Haiti, and they found themselves at child sacrifice ceremonies, sex trafficking ceremonies. Yeah.
My God.
Yeah. When we look on the Mexican border, what do we see going on? The drug cartels were doing things like they worship this. It's like, I don't know how to put it other than to say it's like a dead Virgin Mary. It's like a skeletonic form of the Virgin Mary, right? And I forget what the name of this person is, but this is what's
Santa Maria,
worshipped.
I think. Yep.
Right? And this is being worshipped at the border. So what's happening is you have this rise of intense superstition and necromancy that is, worshiping the dead and conversing with the dead, that is rising up under this veil of Catholicism. And it's part of this culture, which is this drug cartel culture.
Yeah.
And so the corruption now has become widespread, a corruption that goes all through the Mexican social order, where people are kowtowing to the drug cartels. Well, now you have a candidate for president in Mexico who is soon to be elected, a fellow by the name of Obrador. Now, they call him Almo. Almo. I think his name is something like, it's Andre Fabricio Miguel Obrador. So they call him Almo. But he is a panderer to the drug cartels. In fact, he is really an operative for the drug cartels. And he has said, I'm going to teach Trump a lesson as soon as I get elected. And he has vocalized that he intends to nationalize all of Exxon's interest in the oil industry in Mexico, which is about a $20 billion investment. And so the world is now concluding that Mexico has become a failed narco state. That is to say that all of the trappings of the rule of law and the governance of the Mexican state have now fallen prey to the corruption and the control of the drug cartels, which, by the way, they kill people with impunity, right? They kill people with impunity throughout Mexico. And there is no arresting people or having any kind of rule of law. There is what you have is a dominant form of feudalism. That is to say, you're either aligned with this drug cartel or you're aligned with that drug cartel. There is no law. And, but nonetheless, there's 1 million American expats living in Mexico. And there are major American corporations that have extensive investments in Mexico. So this is the climate. Now, what you see now, President Trump has made a lot of statements that many people say, well, that's, he's really racist in his remarks about Mexican Americans, and he says a lot of derogatory stuff. No, the stuff he's saying is true. Okay, it's true.
Yes.
For instance, when you look at most of the rapes in this country are being perpetrated by Mexican immigrants who've come up here without papers, okay, with no documentation.
That's right.
That is to say, they're not here as refugees. They're not here under amnesty. They came here just over the border. Okay. Now, does that mean that all Mexican immigrants are rapists? No, not even close. But when you look at who's occupying the prisons for the rape charges, most of them were illegal immigrants out of Mexico. Now, it's a similar disposition with this girl that got murdered in California. That guy that murdered her had been deported 5 times. So what? Send me back to Mexico. Great. I'll say hi to the family. You guys paid for vacation. I come right back up over the border. And then when some girl gives me too much slip, just knife her to death, whatever. What are they going to do? Deport me? Yeah, I'll be right back, right? And so this is the kind of conditioning that goes on. Now, the average illegal immigrant or the immigrants that have come into the United States, let's face the reality of this, okay? The Democrats want them here because they believe they have their vote. Why? You come here, we'll give you Section 8 housing, we'll give you school stipend, we'll give you scholarships, we'll give you EBT. They estimated that the average Hispanic family was picking up $60,000 a year in benefits.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Of course, when you go into the court systems, you find that, and it doesn't make any difference where you go. For instance, if you call the most northern county in the state of Washington, which is the county of Okanagan, right? It borders the Canadian border. You call the courthouse right there. The very first thing you're going to hear is, for Spanish, dial 1, right?
Right.
It's the very first thing you hear, right? And so
that's right.
And it's because the Democrats want them in the country as a political base. However, the Democrats are the very same people who say, we need to crank up that minimum wage, crank up that minimum wage, crank up that minimum wage. Well, when you're talking about somebody who's picking produce, you can't pay them $14 an hour because you're not going to get you're not going to have a market for that produce.
Right.
So the Republicans have wanted this immigrant base in here too to pick the produce, to pick the fruit, to otherwise do the work that really American youth is unwilling to do. It used to be up here in Washington. It was a rite of passage. The teenagers went out into eastern Washington and picked apples. That was the rite of passage here. Everybody did it for the summer. Not anymore. They don't do that anymore, right? And so you had two camps. Now, there's a third camp out there, which is that we, just like Western Europe, have had a plunging demographic. That is to say, we have not been reproducing enough to keep our population constant. You and I talked about this before, Bishop, and I'm going to talk about it again here. You cannot abort your future.
That's right. Teach, Doc.
And and so this is what's been going on. We've aborted some 50 to 70 million Americans have been aborted that would otherwise be here, that would otherwise have contributed to our demographic, that would otherwise have contributed to the ideas of new schools. A baby boom is an economic boom. But we don't do that anymore. And so there is a demographic reason to import 20, 30 million people. And this is the same thing. The Pope's arguing this in Europe right now. Oh, yeah, let all these millions of immigrants come in from the Muslim world, from the Islamic world.
Yeah.
Because we need them in order to bring us to children you guys won't have. The average European. Let's see. Do you want children? I don't want children. I want a BMW. I want a vacation in Greece, and that's that. Okay, no kids. We're all agreed, right? Well, if everybody agrees to that point for 20 years, now you got no Germans in Germany, no French in France, no Spanish in Spain. And so this is what has been happening. This is what's happening in this country. I mean, I was up in Canada. And here Canada has a smaller population than the state of California. Yes. And they just demand the right to abort. I mean, what are you people out of your mind? Right. You're the second largest country on earth. You don't have as many people as the state of California, and you're aborting your whole future. Anyway, Scripture says that a child is, it's a arrow in your quiver, right? A child is an arrow in your quiver, right? Wonderful things, children, and we should make a place for them in our hearts and in our lives. And at any rate. So you have three reasons that nobody wanted to close the border. All right, but now we've got an issue where you have an out of control narco state, directly beneath this open border, and that has been getting increasingly more violent, and that now promises to nationalize American industry and become a drug cartel controlled nation. And those drug cartels make their money from what? Bringing drugs over that border and selling them in the United States. Now look, they're not the first people who invaded a nation with drugs. I mean, the Queen did it to China. You remember the Opium Wars?
Yes, that's right.
And it finally took a Chinese emperor to say, hey, that's it. Shut the border down. No more, right? Shut the border down. You can't put any more of our people on opium. And you and I both know, Bishop.
Yes, sir.
How much meth has come into this country?
Oh, my God.
How much heroin has come into this country?
Teach on that.
And when you want to talk about meth? Look, let's talk about, I'm sure you've seen the pictures, but I have seen it myself.
Yes.
I'm just going to share with you just a little bit, okay?
Go right ahead.
I've seen people, women, who get hung up on meth, and all they want is the meth. And you come to them and you say, look, you've got two beautiful children at home. What are you going to do about them? I sure hope somebody will raise them, because I'm not leaving the meth.
My God.
And I'll tell you, people, and it doesn't take much. You hook up on that meth once or twice, and you're going to be there for a long time. And once you get onto that meth, look, your teeth fall out, right? Your complexion goes, your hair starts falling out. You'll age 25 years in the next 3 years. And then your life just goes. Everything, you will lose everything to that little g god called meth.
Teach, doctor.
Okay, then how about when we talk about heroin? Well, why do people go to heroin? Well, because they went to the doctor because they broke their arm or they got in a car wreck or they had some bad surgery. They put them on opioids. You know, the oxycodone, the oxycontin, right? They put you on these opioids, and then you go out and then your insurance company says, yeah, you've been addicted to those opioids for 2 months, but we're not covering it anymore. Get to the curb.
Right.
And about half those people go right from the curb right to the guy selling junk on the corner.
Teach that.
Yeah. So, you know, is this our world? Is this the world we're going to have? All right. So let's come back to this issue of sovereignty. So the president has said, okay, here's what we have to do. We have to close the border.
Yes.
Now, there could be a lot of arguments about the DACA kids. There could be a lot of arguments about whether or not there should be amnesty for the people living here. All of those arguments can be had, okay? And let's have those arguments. But before we have those arguments, close the border.
Close the border.
Close the door and lock it and wait for a knock. Okay? But if we don't close the border, we cannot control the issue. And if you have a nation that has no border, you're not a nation. You're a territory. You're a region.
Yes.
Yeah. You're a frontier, right, that's waiting for someone to conquer it.
Yes.
And this is part of the reason why. And the problem is, ask yourself the question, okay, do we want to be conquered by a failed narco state? Is that our preference? Is that what we prefer? No. We need to close that border. And so President Trump is going to secure the border. Now, look, the Obama administration was separating kids from their parents.
That's right. Teach on that, Doc.
The Clinton administration grabbed that kid, Elian Gonzalez, and stuck an AR-15 in his face. You remember that?
Right. Yes. Oh,
I'm sorry.
God,
you didn't have the right document. Time for you to go, right?
Right.
They caved in the door of his family. You know, here's the whole SWAT team wearing the bulletproof armor, the helmets, you know, they got the night goggles on, for heaven's sakes.
Right.
You never can tell. We might run into a 5-year-old.
Yes.
Yeah. 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 So when you're talking about this immigration issue, now I'm going to tell you from my heart, Bishop.
Yes, sir.
You know, the Torah talks about, and Moshe talks about this. He says, remember, the alien in your land should be subject to the same law you are, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt, right?
Yes.
This is an extremely important teaching for all of us. We have people who live in this country who, you know, the vast majority of even the undocumented Mexican immigrants that are in the country.
That's right.
Many of them attend, they attend Viviente de Parablas, right? The Word of God Church, right? They attend. Many of them attend churches. Many of them are actively involved in this kind of community life. They're raising their children. They're paying their taxes. They're doing these things. And hardworking, honest people, many of them, I would say the vast majority of them are. Now, those people should be treated with dignity and care, and they should be subject to the laws of the United States and subject to the due process rights of the United States.
Yes.
Okay. Now, in terms of the amnesty, this is something, or the amnesty, whatever law is going to deal with what's going to happen with the people that in that condition, who were invited into this country. Say what you will, but if you didn't have a border, you know, it's like, for instance, they have a saying in the law, right? Fences make good neighbors, right? You don't put a fence up, pretty soon your neighbor is like parking his lawnmower over there on your section of the lawn, you know? Then he's got his dogs over there. They're doing their duty on your section of the lawn. Pretty soon he's putting up some nice arbors over there and planting some flowers. And 10 years later, he's got you in court saying, I've adversely possessed that little chunk of land that used to belong to you because you didn't put up the fence. Right?
Okay. That's right.
Yeah. So sometimes fences make good neighbors. But if you put up the fence, you've got an understanding. Look, this is the fence. Your dog can't come over here. Okay? When we're having a barbecue, I put in a gate. So your kids can use my pool. Come on by, right? But there's a gate.
Right.
And so this is the kind of thing that has to happen. We have to control the border. And Trump knows we have to control the border. And it's going to be a lot more. And I'm telling you, Bishop, it's going to be a lot more than control the border. There is discussion right now. I mean, there's been a lot of funding that has gone into what the United States is going to do in regards to Mexico. There are right now 5 carrier battle groups that are prepared to address either coast of Mexico. There is a substantial amount of heavy armor in Texas and in Arizona and in Southern California. At one point, there was a clear and visible threat from an armed contingent of MS-13 near Tijuana that was prepared to come over the border with violence.
Oh, my God.
So, so you see that when Trump says that, God, and, this is the thing that absolutely outrages me about what happened up here in Washington. We had our Attorney General, Bob Ferguson. Well, I'm going to sue, right? President Trump issues an executive order. Okay, nobody can come into this country from these 8 countries. Well, I'm going to sue, and this judge out here, well, Mr. Ferguson, what have you got to say? Well, there's no evidence, Your Honor, that there's any threat from countries like Libya or Afghanistan or, these other countries that Somalia, that President Trump has named. There's no evidence of any threats. Oh, okay. Well, I don't see any. I'm reading here the Seattle Times. I don't see any threats here either. So I'm going to go ahead and enjoin it. Okay, let me ask you something, Your Honor. Did you get a chance to be briefed by the NSA? Were you briefed by the CIA? Were you briefed by the Department of Intelligence through military intelligence? Were you briefed by special ops in the field? And what human tell did you actually have on the table when you decided you were smarter than the president to block him from that executive order? Oh, that's right. You had none of that because you're not the president. Right? That's it. And so these are people who say, well, President Trump shouldn't be allowed to close the Mexican border. Those people are nice, kind of. Well, your Hispanic neighbor may be nice and kind, but he's not a member of MS-13. If he was working for the drug cartel in MS-13, he'd be down there, not next to you.
Key stuff.
So President Trump has information that we don't have. He has information concerning the instability of the Mexican infrastructure. He has intel concerning exactly how violent the drug cartels are on the border. He has information as to how much drug trafficking is slipping over the border. He's got information as to how much human trafficking. Look, I was at a seminar here last week.
Yes, sir.
And there was a guy that got up and testified. Hispanic guy. Wonderful guy, actually. And he describes his life as being when he was sex trafficked at 14 years old. He said, we asked him, how'd you come over the border? He says, I don't know how I came over the border. I don't know if I was in a bus or if I was in a plane or what I was in. All I know is that I was laying down and there was an IV in my arm and they were hitting me with all these drugs.
Yes.
When he got to the States, he was raped over 196 times in a 2-year period of time.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And he had his personal story to tell. And I have to tell you, his story was actually remarkable because he has since, now he's a young man. He's 28 and he's married and he is putting his life together. And he's a strong person. He's putting his life together and he's coming out in respect of this. But this, you think sex trafficking doesn't go on over the border, and it's children trafficking going on over the border, human trafficking going on the border, drug trafficking going on over the border, gun trafficking going on over the border, all of this trafficking stuff, not to mention that
Right.
terrorist agents from the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, right? ISIS,
That's right.
and Al Qaeda and Al Nusra, and these other Islamic jihadists can freely travel over that border whenever they want.
Right.
And that they report, I think WorldNet Daily reports something like 39 Islamic militant training centers in this country.
Right.
And, they train with weapons, right? They train with weapons.
That's right.
And they train, they train terrorist strategy inside these places. And this is not to demonize anybody. Again, not all Muslims are terrorists. But
that's right.
What to have free access over the border with impunity at the southern border. That's a national security issue, especially when you can smuggle weapons of mass destruction over that border.
Teach, man of God.
Now, Bishop, I'll just share this with you. When we talk about a weapon of mass destruction, right?
Yes.
Have you heard about this bird flu in China?
A little bit, yes. Break that down.
This bird flu broke out, I think, last week. And it can be transmitted to human beings, which, of course, is something unique about this particular flu virus. And it has a 60% fatality rate. If 10 people catch the flu, 6 of them are going to die. Now, imagine if somebody comes over this border with that. It doesn't necessarily have to be nuclear weapons. It doesn't have to be anthrax, right? You could always come over the border with physically addictive drugs. That's a nice weapon of mass destruction.
Big time.
Yeah. So anyway, these are the circumstances. So when we talk about citizenship and we talk about the law of nations, we talk about the sovereign right. The nation has the sovereign right to ensure its own borders and to be its ultimate authority over its affairs within its geographical boundaries. That's called sovereignty. Now, that sovereignty is subject to the laws of nature and of nature's God. That is to say, just because you are sovereign does not give you the right to commit genocide against the people in your nation. It does not give you the right to commit war crimes in your nation. But it does give you the right to make the rules as to what constitutes citizenship in your country and how you get it and whether or not you can come in.
Well, this is good. And you know what? I heard, I'm telling to our Global Spiritual Revolution partners, again, we collectively are so very honored and blessed. And we know that Yah, He loves us so much because He has given us the very, very best. And that is the Honorable Dr. Stephen Pidgeon. Continue to send in your emails to globalspiritualrevolutionradio@yahoo.com. Again, beloved, globalspiritualrevolutionradio@yahoo.com. As Dr. Pidgeon, Professor Pidgeon, is downloading into us the history and the origins of illegal immigration. Again, background that I had no idea. And you hit a nerve with me with this MS-13. And there is, when we study Latin demonology, especially in the Hispanic world, and what I'm about to say, this is nothing against Hispanic people. And like you said, man of God, we have American Hispanic citizens in this country who are beautiful. I have some who are pastors and bishops, legal citizens. But you made mention of this MS-13. Now, I've been getting a plethora of emails, man of God, for the past few days from our partners asking me, where did this MS-13 come from? Well, first of all, and correct me if I'm wrong what I'm about to say, man of God, because a wise son receives correction. This term, MS-13, MS comes from the Latino word Mara Salvatrucha. Again, Mara, capital M-A-R-A, Salvatrucha, capital S-A-L-V, like in Victor A, T-R-U-C-H-A, transliteration from the word Santa Maria. Santa Maria, or Soteria, is a name of a high-ranking demon in Spanish and Latino demonology. I've got to say this again. So this MS-13, revelation oftentimes is in the name. This MS-13 means Mara Salvatrucha, okay, which means Santa Maria, or Della Victoria, which is a high-ranking male and female principality or demon in Spanish and Latino demonology. And when we examine Latino demonology, this Santa Maria or Soteria or MS-13, which its name is really encoded in Latino demonology, is a demon that endangers certain parts of nations to overrun that nation. Again, I'm not talking about Spanish people. Now, when we studied the political roots of this, to me, man of God, and correct me if I'm wrong, because a wise man receives correction, that the history of MS-13 goes back to 1954, when the Central Intelligence Agency, through Operation PBSUCCESS, overthrew in a governmental coup d'etat the Jacob Arbenz. So Jacob Arbenz was removed from office through the Central Intelligence Agency's agents who were Spanish of El Salvadorian descent. And this revolution was going on between 1944 to 1954, codenamed Operation PBSUCCESS, where the El Salvadorian, including the Guatemalan government, with CIA backing, put in Carlos Castillo Armas. And they removed Jacob Arbenz because he was nationalizing, the fruit industry. I'm talking about bananas and tomatoes. He was nationalizing that, and the CIA said, no, we got to remove this man, okay? And those, and again, this is not against Spanish people, but you hit a nerve with me, Dr. Pidgeon, when you talk about MS-13, because in order for us to understand the present day MS-13, and I agree with President Trump. What I'm about to say, I'm not saying Spanish people are animals. MS-13, those men and women are animals. And in Long Island, here in Long Island, especially in Brentwood, there are killings, mutilations of young people because of this MS-13. And so we have a great president now that is exposing MS-13. And so, but to understand the political background of MS-13, of this Mara Salvatrucha, which is a transliteration from the word Santa Maria or Soteria, which is actually a male and female demon in Latino demonology, a demon that overtakes communities in certain nations. But it goes back to the 1954 Guatemalan coup d'etat, where the CIA would send in El Salvadorian and Guatemalan men whose descendants today is MS-13. So MS-13, and why the number 13? The number 13 in Luciferian numerology is a number of organizational darkness, because when we look on the back of the American dollar bill with the pyramid, it has 13 levels of bricks on the pyramid with the all-seeing eye of Lucifer at the top. And so under Barack Obama, he did nothing. There are African-American children who are being murdered, Dr. Pidgeon, here in New York because of MS-13. And when President Trump was speaking at the State of the Union address, I think his first one, which I really believe was the most powerful State of the Union address I've ever heard from any president during my lifetime. And he brought I believe, two families, an African-American man and an African-American family, a husband and wife, whose children were murdered by MS-13, and you got the Congressional Black Caucus, did not stand, was sitting there and said nothing. And myself as a Black American, man of God, I was ashamed. It was embarrassing to look at the Black Caucus with Maxine Waters and John Lewis and all these other devils sitting there while these parents were suffering. I'm telling you, we have the greatest president in my lifetime. And he's not even at his 30-year period. We have the greatest president in my lifetime, and that is Donald J. Trump, 929-477-3997. So I wanted to give that background of MS-13. Now, there is a brand new and Austrian chancellor, this young man, by the name of Sebastian Kurz. This man is a young Donald Trump. And so Global Spiritual Revolution Partners, if you get an opportunity, go on to www.usnews.com/Sebastian Kurz, K-U-R-Z. He is pushing the EU and for every Western European nation to close its borders. This brother is not playing. He's taking a hard line because you got these Western nations, okay, like Belgium and Denmark and Sweden and France and Germany. France is no longer Paris. It is a crap hole. These once beautiful Western European nations are overrun by illegal immigrants, and a lot of them have close ties to Al-Qaeda. Now, I'm not saying that every single European immigrant is a murderer. Man of God, I'm going to say this, and you just take over from here. But you know what's so interesting? That these Western European powers who love illegal immigrants are not like those Eastern European powers. You look in Poland, Poland's not playing. You look at Poland and Hungary, and Russia, the Czech Republic, Romania, okay, Lithuania, Latvia. They don't allow this illegal immigration crap. Okay? You got Angola in Western Africa. They have banned Islam altogether. And there are certain countries throughout Europe, East and West, that are beginning the legal process of banning Islam. It's about time. And like you said, man of God, if you don't have a fence or border, you are no longer a nation. And I know people are going to get mad at me, oh, you're a racist. I don't care. And the shameful, I'm going to say this and get out of the way. You got me so excited as usual, man of God. It was so shameful for Time Life magazine to put that picture, the picture of our president looking down at this child. Pathetic. And they got the picture of this little child and photo-cropped it from an event that had nothing to do with President Trump. And the parents of this child both belong to MS-13. But I guarantee you Time Life didn't tell you that. Okay?
Well, Bishop, when you're
go ahead, man. I'm so sorry for hollering. Go ahead. You got me.
No,
so
when you're
Go
talking
ahead,
about that picture, this is the fact that the magazine is willing to lie at that level tells you that we're in a nonviolent civil war in this country.
Oh, my God.
It is a civil war in this country. And by the way, this cult I was telling you about in along the border, this is Nuestra Señora de la Santa Muerta. Santa Muerta, Saint Dead, right? Saint Dead.
Oh, my God.
And, our woman of death. And by the way, this cult is mostly practiced along the border, is growing. And yes, you did see horrific crimes. I mean, you've seen beheadings and extreme crimes by MS-13 members working with the drug cartels on the border. I mean, that's what's going on.
Oh, my God. And the editor of Time Life magazine, Edward FELSENTHAL. And again, when I'm about to say, Doctor, I love you so much, man of God. I thank God because you are raising me and our listeners to a new level. The editor-in-chief, he was actually new at Time Magazine as the editor, Edward FELSENTHAL, capital FELSENTHAL, is a member not just of Kappa Beta 5, okay, which is a Wall Street powers that be that are connected to Rothschild money. And so thereby, Rothschild and the Rothschild family out of Europe controls Time Life magazine. And putting a little girl, okay, whose parents are tied to MS-13, and like you said, man of God, earlier in the broadcast, MS-13 is sending young men and women masquerading as parents, bringing these children over the border for sex trafficking throughout our country. But you got the Democrats who they don't care. And I don't understand. They filed a lawsuit to the DNC because President Trump is separating children. But President Trump already signed an executive order so that the parents and the children cannot be separated. These Democrats, they're sick. And forgive me for hollering, Manica. You got me so excited. And this MS-13, these children today, they're animals. I'll tell you, I'll tell you like it is. These devils are animals, okay? And they are threatening a lot of pastors here in New York because, especially a lot of Latino pastors, they're exposing MS-13. And these children that are in MS-13 are the great descendants of the CIA-backed Guatemalan rebels who overthrew Jacob Arbenz back in 50. This is where all this MS-13 mess started from. It is not only a murderous mafia, but they are also a global Spanish cult. They are a occultic system. And I'm telling you, man, I'm going to say this. I believe that great patriots like yourself, praise God, and culture that we're going to have on our broadcast in September, and I want you on for that to co-host with me, man of God. Great patriots like our great president and the chancellor of Austria, Sebastian Kurz, they're saying no more. In New Jersey, man of God, it came out today in the New York Times that an illegal immigrant, and again, this is not against Spanish people. This is against illegal immigration because of Barack Obama. An illegal immigrant, a young lady, a 21-year-old Latino girl, was arrested on yesterday in New Jersey for strangling her newborn daughter. And I want the Global Spiritual Revolution partners to hear me. Jade Sance, that's not even her real name, strangled her daughter and put the body of her daughter in a dumpster behind her home in Franklin Township, New Jersey, an illegal immigrant. And this is what gets my blood boiling. On Fox News today, they were saying that an illegal immigrant in Maryland by the name of Ronaldo Mora, 41 years old, was arrested back in April after he was accused, and he was a member of MS-13 in Mitchellville, Maryland. Ronaldo Mora, 41 years old, was arrested back in April because he was accused of raping and impregnating a nonverbal 13-year-old girl with special needs. And you got Maxine Waters saying, well, just deport him. No. See, again, this is a war going on. And, man of God, I'm telling you, listen, we have to start protecting our borders. Because when we examine the history and the top 10 nations with the most illegal immigrants up there, you're talking about Australia, Canada, Germany, England. You got kids over there being killed, okay, by MS-13 games in Sheffield, England. That's right. Illegal immigrants. Spain, France. Angela Merkel must, oh my God, don't get me. Angela Merkel is on her way out. Angela Merkel was on her way out. I can't remember
and as they say in
woman's
Germany,
name.
Bishop, as they say in Germany to Ms. Merkel,
go ahead.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Oh, my God. And I can't remember the lady's name that lost against Angela Merkel. They called her the female Donald Trump. I can't remember her name. But I'm telling you, and you got the European Union, and they are backing illegal immigration. But the Austrian Chancellor, this Sebastian Kurz, looks like he's no more than 30, 32 years old. He is saying that the entire European border agency called Frontex must be dismantled and rebuilt again. Because you got young girls who are being raped. You got young, beautiful girls in Sweden. And I'm telling the Swedes, I'm telling all the Europeans, you got to take your country back. Take your country back. Now, people say, oh, Bishop, you're a racist. Stop. I'm not a racist. Because like Professor Pidgeon said, if you don't have a wall, if you don't have any borders, you cease to exist as a nation. And the state of California is the leading state. They got over 2 million illegal immigrants. 40% of these undocumented people are taking jobs. And you know who's really upset about this? It's black people. Black people are saying, listen, we don't hate illegal immigrants, but they're killing us. And that's why Black America voted for Donald Trump. Because they're sick and they are tired of this. Their children's, oh my God. Their children's life is being infected. You got 43 million vets on the street. No job, no home, no Social Security card. They fought, bled, and almost died. For what? So that people might have a right to become legal immigrants. But you got over 11.5 million legal immigrants in this country. And again, I am not against Latino people, but like you said, man of God, something has to change. And thank God that the Supreme Court held in favor President Obama's ban. Okay, on a Muslim, on not just it's not a Muslim ban, or it's a ban because of some of these nations. Was it Yemen and Syria, Iraq and Iran? These are nations where you have a hotbed of Al-Qaeda terrorist organizations. Man of God, wrap this up for us. Oh, you got me so excited.
Sure.
What is your last
Bishop,
words before we close out tonight?
Yeah, the thing is, when you're talking about those countries, what most people don't know is that those countries were given fake American passports and fake American green cards, which is why President Trump put the order in place, because we couldn't have people coming in here with fake documentation. And these judges didn't know that. That's why they were reversed by the Supreme Court 9-0. 9-0. And so as a consequence, what you see is that President Trump is right on the law, and he has the difficult job of being strong. He has to be strong now where we were weak before. We have to be strong now. And as it might be ugly, but this is what we have to do. And, as a nation goes, if we're going to retain the status of a nation state again, and maybe we retain a nation state May we be a nation that is beautiful and wonderful inside our borders. But we have to get the borders first.
That's it. And that's the problem. And a matter of fact, I don't think there's enough nations on this ban. If you ask me, you got Iran, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. There's got to be more nations on this ban. I believe not only do we not have enough nations on this travel ban, but we don't have enough military bases. Oh, man, God. I believe that we, as the most powerful nation on the earth, should dominate in peace and love so that other nations can be protected. Oh, my God. Dr. Pidgeon, I'm so excited. And thank you so much for being with us tonight. And on July the 10th, we're going to have Dr. Pidgeon on the TV portion here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. Dr. Pidgeon, thank you so much for really pouring into us tonight because, again, you had transformed my thinking tonight. Thank you so much.
My great pleasure, Bishop. My great pleasure to be here.
And love you and y'all, sir. And that was Dr. Professor Stephen Pidgeon, the most powerful political science and number one political scientist in this country, the greatest teacher, I believe, in the Western Hemisphere here in the 21st century. And please go to Sepher.net, and order your Sepher today, which is the greatest translation and transliteration of the Word of God that we have ever read. I'm telling you, in Christendom, this is the number one translation that would take you back to the original tongue and dialect. Go to Sepher.net, capital CEPHER and .net, and order your Sepher today, and I guarantee you, your life would never be the same in the Lord Jesus Christ. Love you, Professor Pidgeon. We'll see you in 2 weeks on July 10th. Thank you so much. God bless you, and give our love to the family. Thank you, sir.
Amen. Thank you.
God bless you. And that was Dr. Stephen Pidgeon here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio tonight. We are so excited, amen. And tonight, we started a brand new series entitled The History and Origins of Illegal Immigration, Part 1. And we will definitely post this tonight on Facebook.com/Global Spiritual Revolution Radio, Twitter.com/Bishop L. Gators, and YouTube.com/Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. Tonight, in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, for we are raising the consciousness of mankind to become the consciousness of the Lord Jesus Christ, and our number one aim and goal is to awaken an unawakened generation here in the 21st century in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. The History and Origins of Illegal Immigration, Part number 1. Listen, we are not racist here. We are not anti-Spanish or anti-Mexican or anti-Latino. But we are anti-illegal immigration. And if anyone wants to become a legal citizen in this country, you got to come in right. Okay? And that is our premise. All right, God bless you. Have a great night tonight. We will see you on Thursday for Part 33, Apostolic Module 33 of the Acts of the Apostles Summit, here and only here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. We're going to have on August the 1st Mr. Edward Snowden. We're going to be interviewing him via Skype on August the 1st, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we're going to be talking about surveillance and security in the 21st century. And also we're going to have with us also for the very, very first time, world-renowned conservative author, pundit, author, commentator, one of the most powerful voices of truth here in America and around the world, and that is the Honorable Ann Coulter, will be with us on the September 11th for a special 9/11 broadcast at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We will give you more information in the coming weeks to come, and we are excited, and we love you guys in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. And before we sign off tonight, listen, we need your financial help. Please continue to sow your financial gifts at paypal.me/GSRR Media Group. And again, beloved, that is paypal.me/capital G, capital S, capital R Media Group. Now, GSRR Media Group has no spaces or dashes. Please go online right now and sow your gift. Please, right now. Please sow your gift right now at PayPal. Again, at paypal.me/GSRR Media Group. Again, beloved, that's paypal.me/GSRR Media Group. Please sow $10, $20, $200, $2,000, $100,000. So we need your finances so that we can provide you the very best in Christian Conservative Talk Radio. Good night in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. We love you all, and we'll see you on Thursday at 7 p.m. here and only here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio out of New York City, New York. We see you next time, which is Thursday. God bless you in Jesus' mighty name.